I stood in the middle of the living room, trying to realize that this house now belonged to me. 30 years, 30 long years of saving, overtime, and giving up vacations for this moment. My own home in an upscale neighborhood in Cambridge. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, creating whimsical patterns on the parquet floor. The dark wood furniture, the marble-topped fireplace, the built-in bookcases. It was exactly as I'd imagined it, lying awake on those faraway nights in our cramped house on the outskirts. I slowly lowered myself into the leather chair, feeling it take the shape of my body. 75 years old. Who would have thought that at this age I would finally get what I had dreamed of all my life? Alice didn't see it anymore. My Alice, who always said that we should live now, not postpone happiness for later. "Erwin, you're a stubborn ass," she often said when I refused to take another trip or buy a new car. "Life passes, and you keep saving up for your castle. And now here it is, my castle. Only there's no queen." My gaze fell on the only picture I'd already unpacked our family from 20 years ago. Alice with her constant smile. Me, always tense as if I'd swallowed a ruler. Jenny, who'd inherited her mother's freckles and carefree attitude. And Hunter, my proud, ambitious son. I ran my finger along the glass. Hunter and I were so similar on the outside, but so different on the inside. Where I saw perseverance and discipline, he looked for shortcuts. I was building a career as a civil engineer, step by step. He wanted everything at once. And I indulged him, letting him avoid the consequences of his decisions. Jenny, my quiet, sensitive Jenny, became distant after my mother died. Perhaps I'd gotten too caught up in work and grief, failed to give her what she needed. Or maybe she'd always seen right through me, cold, calculating, unable to show feelings. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. I struggled to get up, feeling my knees aching after a day of unpacking. Opening the door, I saw a tall, gray-haired man about my age. "Hello, you must be the new neighbor?" "I'm Oliver Priestley. I live across the street." "Erwin Oldham." I held out my hand and he shook it firmly. "Just moved in." Oliver smiled and an array of wrinkles spread from his eyes. "I noticed a van full of furniture. Thought you might need some help. At our age, moving stuff around is a lot of fun." "Thanks, but I've hired movers," I said. But then I thought about it and added, "If you don't mind, you can help me with the heating system, though. I can't seem to find the thermostat." It was an excuse, and we both knew it. But Oliver nodded as if I'd asked him for something vital. "I'd love to. We all have the same system in our neighborhood. Pretty damn confusing if you don't know where to look." I let him in, and Oliver headed confidently toward a small panel hidden behind a decorative grate in the hallway. There it was, the sneaky beast. The builders think the thermostats spoil the interior, so they hide them in the most unexpected places. "Yeah," I grinned. It was much simpler in my old house. The heating didn't work very often, though. "Where did you move from, if it was no secret?" Oliver asked, adjusting the temperature. "Essex. I'd lived there all my life, but after my wife died, I decided it was time for a change of scenery." Oliver nodded understandingly. "I was widowed 3 years ago. I know what it's like." There was a silence between us, not awkward, but respectful, full of unspoken understanding. "Tea?" I offered, surprised at my own hospitality. I wasn't usually one for socializing. "It would be my pleasure." Oliver followed me into the kitchen. "What did you do before you retired?" "A civil engineer." I pulled out the kettle. 30 years designing bridges and overpasses. "And you?" "Lawyer," he answered, taking a seat at the table. "Civil cases, mostly property disputes. Boring for most people, but for me it was a passion. So, nothing boring about defending what's rightfully people's," I said, setting down the cups. Oliver looked at me with interest. "Most people think lawyers are vultures, and most people think engineers are boring," I countered. "I'd always thought it wasn't what you did, but how you did it." We continued to talk, finding an unexpected similarity in our outlook on life. Oliver proved to be a smart and insightful conversationalist with a dry sense of humor that I'd always appreciated. To my surprise, we talked for almost 2 hours before he glanced at his watch and apologized. "I'm afraid I have to go. I promised my daughter I'd call on the video link. She insists on checking in every day like I'm a wreck. Kids, I sighed. Before you know it, they're treating you like a kid. Huh. Oh, you have kids too? A son and a daughter. We're not really close, though. It's a shame. What's, Oliver said sincerely. At our age, family's the mainstay. I nodded, not wanting to go into that. After I saw Oliver off, I went back to unpacking. As I put the books back on the shelves, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I'd had a pleasant evening of company. Maybe moving had really been the right decision. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. I set up the house, familiarized myself with the neighborhood, even started planning a small patio garden. Oliver stopped by a few times, helping with minor repairs and sharing gossip about the neighbors. I found myself enjoying this measured, quiet life. But on Saturday morning, the quiet was broken. I was eating breakfast when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw a black premium sedan, Hunter's car. My heart prickled with anxiety. We hadn't seen each other in almost 6 months, and he didn't even know I'd moved. The bell rang as I wiped my hands with a kitchen towel. Opening the door, I met my gaze with my son. Hunter was dressed in an immaculate suit, his hair already touched with gray, styled with gel. He always looked like the cover of a magazine, my successful son, a stockbroker with a prestigious address and an impressive client list. At least that's how he presented himself. "Father!" he exclaimed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Surprise!" "A surprise indeed." I led him into the house. "How did you find me?" Hunter shrugged nonchalantly, looking around the hallway with an appraising gaze. "Stopped by your house, found some strangers. They said they'd bought the house from an old man who'd moved to Cambridge. I had to pick their brains." "Nice place," he whistled as he walked into the living room. "Must have cost a fortune." "I can afford it," I said dryly. 30 years of savings, you know. Hunter laughed. "Yeah, I remember your manic frugality. Mom always said you were putting life on hold." The shot was precise. Hunter always knew where to hit. "Tea? Coffee?" I asked, changing the subject. "Coffee, if there's anything decent, not the instant stuff you usually drink." I walked silently into the kitchen, pulled out the coffee maker, and started making espresso. Hunter followed me, studying every detail of the interior. "Seriously, Dad, I'm impressed. I never thought you'd make a move like this. New house, upscale neighborhood." He's leaning against the counter. "What's next? Mediterranean cruise? A mistress half your age?" I ignored the sarcasm. "How's Anita?" I asked about his third wife. "Fourth, father. Anita was the third," he corrected with mild irritation. "Gabriella and I were separated too, 6 months ago." "I sympathize," I said, though I wasn't surprised. Hunter's marriages rarely lasted longer than 2 years. "Don't be," he said. "It's better to break up than to put up with it like you and Mom." I froze, clutching my coffee cup. "Your mother and I were happy." "Of course we were, Dad." Hunter rolled his eyes. "Because for you, happiness is quiet, order, and no surprises." I set the coffee cup in front of him and sat down across from him. "Why did you come here, Hunter?" "Hardly just to appreciate my new home." He took a sip, nodded approvingly, and then suddenly changed his tone completely. "I'm worried about you, Father," he said with a sincerity I'd never heard before. "Such a big move at your age, a new place, no one around." "I'm not an invalid," I cut him off. "I'm 75, not 105. Still, Hunter leaned forward, a caring note in his voice. "Moving, new surroundings. It's stressful. Have you noticed you've started forgetting things? Confusing names?" I frowned. "Not at all. Just think about it." He put his hand on mine, and I could barely keep from pulling it away. "I talked to a specialist. At your age, it's common for things to start to, you know, the initial stages of dementia can be almost imperceptible. The person doesn't realize there's anything wrong with them." I put the cup down and straightened up. "There's nothing wrong with me, Hunter. I had a full checkup before I moved in. My blood pressure, my heart, my head all working like clockwork." He held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Sure, sure, sure. I'm just suggesting you pay attention. And maybe you should consider having someone check on you from time to time. A babysitter or—" "I don't need a sitter." I felt my irritation rising. I'm completely on my own and I intend to stay that way. Hunter sighed with the look of a saint putting up with a cranky child. All right, father, but at least let me stop by once in a while. Make sure everything's okay. I looked at my son for a long moment. Something about his sudden concern seemed fake. Hunter never took much interest in my life unless he needed money. You've never been a particularly caring son, I observed. Why the change? Something flashed in his eyes, irritation, resentment, but he got over it quickly. People change, father. Maybe I finally realized the value of family. I didn't believe a word of it, but I nodded. All right, you can stop by if you want. Hunter sat for another hour or so, asking about the house, about the neighbors, about my plans. He took an unnatural interest in the details of my daily life, writing something down in his phone. And then, as if by the way, he asked me when he was about to leave. By the way, you've updated your will, haven't you? With a new house and everything? I froze on the threshold. Why? No reason, just thinking. He shrugged his shoulders with feigned indifference. With assets like that, it pays to have a clear succession plan in case something happens to you. I looked at my son, at his impeccable suit, his expensive watch, his manicured hands, and suddenly I realized with piercing clarity that he was only interested in my house. My new expensive house in an upscale neighborhood. Don't worry, I said. I'm doing just fine. Hunter nodded, but there was something predatory, calculating in his gaze. He patted my shoulder, his hand lingering a little longer than necessary. Take care of yourself, father. And don't forget to take your medicine. It's so important at your age. I didn't answer that I wasn't taking any medication. I just watched him get into his expensive car and drive away, leaving me with an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite articulate. A week passed after Hunter's visit. I was slowly settling into my new home, putting things in their proper places and getting used to the creaks of floorboards and the sounds of plumbing. Every morning I woke up with a sense of satisfaction. I was finally living the life I'd always dreamed of. That morning I went down to the kitchen and discovered that the coffee pot was not where I had left it the day before. Instead of the top shelf, it was in the cabinet under the sink. I frowned, trying to remember if I had actually moved it the night before. No, I definitely remembered putting it back on the shelf. It had become a habit back in the old house. Strangely, I decided not to pay much attention to it. Probably I was just tired in the evening and did it automatically. The next day, however, my reading glasses disappeared. I was sure I had left them on the bedside table, as I had done every night for the last 15 years. I searched the whole house and found them in the pocket of a coat I hadn't worn in days. By the end of the week, these incidents were becoming more frequent. The TV remote was in the refrigerator. My slippers ended up in the dressing room instead of the hallway. The bills I had neatly laid out on the table for payment moved to the kitchen drawer. I started taking notes. An old engineering habit. If there's a problem, you have to collect data. Each morning I recorded where I left key items, and in the evening I checked to see if they were in place. 9 times out of 10, the items were not where I left them. You're getting paranoid, Irwin, I muttered to myself, looking at the notes. Or you're really starting to forget. That thought bothered me the most. What if Hunter was right? What if I really do have the early stages of dementia? I'd always prided myself on my sharp mind, my ability to remember the smallest details of the projects I worked on. The thought that my mind might be failing me was unbearable. Saturday night, I sat in the garden with Oliver. We were sipping whiskey and talking politics when I decided to share my concerns. Oliver, have you noticed anything strange about me? I asked cautiously. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. What do you mean? Forgetfulness, absent-mindedness. I stirred the whiskey in my glass. You see, strange things have been happening to me lately. Things are out of place. I can't remember where I put things. Oliver set the glass aside and looked at me carefully. Irwin, I've only known you for a couple weeks, but I think you're one of the most organized people I've ever met. Last week, you remembered the title of a book I mentioned in passing, and the exact quote from it. I breathed a sigh of relief. So you don't think I'm losing my mind? Absolutely not, Oliver said firmly. Why do you ask? I told him about the shifting things and my concerns. Oliver stroked his chin. And when did it start, I wondered. After my son's visit, I think. Slora, the son who suddenly became concerned about your health and hinted at dementia? Our eyes met, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Do you think? I don't think anything, Oliver said carefully. It's just an interesting coincidence. When is he going to visit you again? He said he was coming by tomorrow to see how I'm doing. Oliver nodded. You know, I think you should install a couple of cameras for your own peace of mind. Cameras? I was shocked. In my own house? Nothing extreme. Oliver held up his hand. Just a small camera in the living room or kitchen. If it's okay, you'll know you're really forgetting things, and you can see a doctor. And if it's not, he didn't finish the sentence, but I got the point. The next morning I woke up with determination. If my son is really involved in these oddities, I need to know about it. I didn't have time to buy a camera, but I decided to set up a little test. In a prominent place on the kitchen table, I left my day planner open to a page of notes about strange things moving around. Then I set up a few traps, items arranged in a special way to notice if they were moved. Hunter arrived around 2 out in the afternoon with a bag of groceries. I thought I'd make you dinner, he announced as he walked into the kitchen. You were always a terrible cook. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, pretending I was busy reading the paper. Hunter noticed the day planner on the table, but didn't react. He unloaded the groceries and started cooking, chatting about insignificant things. Why don't we go for a walk while it's stewing? He suggested after half an hour. It's good for you to get moving. I agreed, and we went to a small park nearby. Hunter was unusually attentive, supporting me under my elbow on the stairs, speaking slowly and clearly, as if I were deaf. You know, Father, he said as we strolled down the alley, I found a great specialist, elder care. She could come by a couple times a week, help you with shopping, cleaning. I don't need an assistant, I said. I'm doing just fine on my own. Sure, Hunter smiled indulgently, but you're not getting any younger. Sooner or later, you're going to need help. It's best to be prepared. I didn't say anything, but I was growing uneasy inside. Why would he be so insistent that I couldn't handle it? When we got home, I noticed that the door, which I was sure I'd locked with a key, was just closed. Quote alum. That's odd, I muttered. I thought I had locked the door. See, Father, Hunter put his hand on my shoulder. That's what I'm talking about. Forgetfulness. It's normal at your age, but it needs to be addressed. We walked into the house, and I headed straight to the kitchen to check my traps. As I suspected, a lot had changed. The daily journal had been closed and moved to the side. Purposefully arranged items had moved. Is something wrong? Hunter asked, noticing me looking around the kitchen. No, nothing's wrong. I tried to smile. I was just checking to see if your stew was burning. Dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. Hunter kept talking about preparing for the future and how important it was to make sure you get the right care. I nodded and pretended to listen, but my thoughts were far away. After dinner, Hunter insisted on doing the dishes. You go get some rest, he said. I'll finish up here and leave. You must be tired, huh? A little, I lied, rising from the table. I think I'll lie down. Instead of going to the bedroom, I slipped quietly into the study and closed the door behind me, leaving a small gap. The kitchen was clearly visible from the study, and I could see Hunter, who, having finished with the dishes, began methodically moving items around the kitchen. The coffee pot went into the bottom cabinet, the reading glasses went into the fruit vase, and the TV remote went under the couch cushion. I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of rage rising in me. So all this time he'd been deliberately making it look like I was oblivious. My own son was trying to convince me that I was losing my mind. Hunter finished his work and pulled out his cell phone. I heard him dial the number. Hey, it's me, he said softly. Yeah, I just heard from him. No, everything's going according to plan. The old man doesn't suspect a thing. I froze listening. Look, Lamont, I need you to expedite the paperwork, Hunter said softly. But in the quiet of the house, I could make out every word. I got a call from the casino. They won't wait forever. If I don't pay off my debt by the end of the month, I'm going to be in serious trouble. Pause. Hunter tapped his fingers nervously on the countertop. I know it's a large sum. 400,000 pounds isn't lying around. But the old man's house is worth 5 times that. As soon as we declare him incompetent, I'll have control of his assets and I can pay it off. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. 400,000 pounds? A casino? And Hunter's planning to take over my house to cover his debts? No, the forensics won't be a problem, Hunter continued. I've got a doctor I know who'll confirm the early stages of dementia. And I've been documenting oddities for a month now. Forgetfulness, mood swings, inability to take care of himself. Plus, the neighbors will confirm that he's acting strange. I've already talked to a couple of old ladies across the street. I covered my mouth with my hand so I wouldn't give myself away. I was sickened by the magnitude of the betrayal. Yeah, I'm aware he might resist, Hunter sounded annoyed. But I have a plan B. I'm secretly switching out his blood pressure pills for neuroleptics. In a week or two, he'll really be confused and disoriented. Even if the initial forensics are questionable, the reassessment will confirm it. My son was planning to poison me, to change my medication so that I would actually lose my mind. I slumped against the wall, feeling my heart pounding. No, he doesn't suspect anything, Hunter grinned. The old fool was always too busy with his bridges and calculations to notice the obvious. He doesn't even realize I've known about his stash for a long time. All this time he's been saving up for a dream house, denying my mother and me everything, and now he's bought himself this mansion. Like hell I'm going to let him enjoy his old age in luxury while I'm being cornered by creditors. There was such anger in his voice that I hardly recognized my son. Had he always treated me like this? Did he hide such hatred behind all the smiles and rare visits? Okay, I have to go, Hunter finished. Keep working on the paperwork. I'll file a petition with the court next week, as soon as I have enough evidence of his incompetence. And remember, this is our chance to make a big score. Once we get control of his assets, we can legally sell the house and send the old man to some cheap boarding house in the suburbs. He doesn't need much in his condition. He laughed, and that laughter cut me to the heart. I quietly retreated to the back of the office when Hunter finished talking. I needed time to gather my thoughts before facing him again. After a few minutes, I heard his voice. Father, are you okay? I'm leaving. I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together, and walked out of the office, a sleepy smile plastered on my face. Sorry, son, I dozed off in the chair, I said, rubbing my eyes. You leaving already? Hunter smiled, the same fake smile I could see through now. Yeah, I have an important meeting tomorrow. I'll stop by next week to check on you. Sure, I nodded, trying to make my voice sound normal. Thanks for dinner. You're welcome, he patted my shoulder. Your pills are on the nightstand. Don't forget to take them before you go to bed. I nodded again, knowing I'd never touched those pills. Hunter left and I was left standing in the middle of the living room, stunned by the betrayal. My own son was planning to rob me of my home, my fortune, and even my sanity. Bitterness spread inside, mixed with rage and a sense of helplessness. But slowly, determination began to break through the storm of emotions. I won't let him do this. I'm not going down without a fight. Hunter thinks I'm a helpless old man who can't understand his plans? Well, he grossly underestimates his father. I sat down at the table and began to formulate a plan. Hunter has no idea that I know what he's up to, and that's my advantage. I'll play the role of a naive old man, gradually succumbing to his manipulations. But behind the scenes, I'll start preparing a counterstrike. First thing I need to do is get rid of the fake drugs and find proof of his machinations. Then talk to Oliver as a former lawyer. He should know what steps to take to protect himself. I felt strangely calm. All my life, I'd been a calculating person, capable of dealing with complex problems in cold blood. This situation was just another engineering problem that required precise calculation and calibrated action. Hunter will soon find out he's messing with the wrong man. I'll teach him a lesson he'll never forget. After Hunter's plans were exposed, I spent several sleepless nights thinking about my son's betrayal. My thoughts kept returning to our past relationship, to how I could have overlooked this growing hatred, this cold calculation. I always thought I was doing everything for his good, teaching him discipline, responsibility, the ability to achieve goals. Perhaps I was too strict, too demanding. But does that justify what he plans to do? Oliver and I met regularly over a game of chess, and I confided my concerns to him. He advised me to gather evidence, record phone conversations, store fake drugs, install hidden cameras. I followed his advice, turning my house into a small fortress with a surveillance system. Wow. You have to be prepared for him to try to sue for custody, Oliver warned me one night, making a queen move. Do you think he has a chance? I asked, studying the board. He's got a good lawyer, if you mean Lamont. I know that guy. He's a slippery guy, no stranger to dirty tricks. Oliver stroked his chin thoughtfully. But they'll have a hard time without proof of your incapacity. He was talking about a bribed doctor and neighbors who would confirm my weirdness, I reminded him. Then we need to get ahead of them. You should get an independent evaluation from a reliable specialist. Oliver wrote something down in his day planner. I know a neurologist who isn't for sale. I'll arrange a meeting. The next day after lunch, I heard the doorbell ring. Expecting to see Oliver, I was surprised to see an unfamiliar man in a strict suit on the doorstep. Mr. Irwin Oldham? He asked in a formal tone. Yes, that's me. You have a summons. He handed me an envelope. You are summoned to appear in the Cambridge court next week, Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning, for the trial of your incapacity and the appointment of a guardian. Even though I knew of my son's plans, I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. It's one thing to suspect, but it's quite another to hold in your hands an official document confirming that your own child is trying to strip you of all your rights. Who's the plaintiff? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Mr. Hunter Oldham, the man checked the papers. Your son, if I'm not mistaken. I nodded silently, feeling a bitter lump in my throat. Sign here, he handed me the clipboard. And please don't miss the meeting. In case you fail to appear, the decision may be made without your presence. I signed my signature with a trembling hand, and the courier left, leaving me alone with the reality that had recently seemed like a bad dream. Immediately calling Oliver, I broke the news. It's happening faster than I expected, he admitted. They're in a hurry. You need a lawyer, Irwin. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specializes in this kind of thing. Would you mind? I've been retired for 8 years. Oliver shook his head. I've never practiced family law. But I have a friend, Rachel Drake, one of the best in the business. I'll call her today. The next week was a blur. I met with Rachel Drake, an energetic woman in her 40s with a piercing gaze and business acumen. She listened carefully to my story, reviewed the evidence she'd gathered of Hunter's manipulations and his phone records. We have enough to fend off the first attack, she said, reviewing the documents. But I must warn you, judges often overreact in these cases. Even if your son doesn't prove total incompetence, there's a chance the court will grant temporary guardianship while the medical evaluation is underway. And Hunter would get control of my finances? I asked. Probably, she nodded. But we'll fight it. The main thing now is to get an independent examination before the trial. We have to have up-to-date medical reports. The day of the trial came unexpectedly quickly. I put on my best suit, the one I had once worn to a professional award. It hung on me like a sack. I'd lost weight in recent weeks from stress and insomnia. The courthouse, an imposing Victorian structure with high ceilings and marble columns, felt foreign and hostile to me. In the hallway, I saw Hunter talking to a tall man in an expensive suit, apparently the infamous attorney Lamont. Hunter noticed me and took a step toward me, but Rachel put a hand on my shoulder warningly. No contact with the opposing party until the hearing, she said quietly. Anything you say can be used against you. I nodded and walked past my son, not dignifying him with a glance. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, a chamber-like room with several rows of benches and a judge's dais. I noticed several strangers in the room, casting studying glances in my direction. One of them held a folder with medical symbols on it, apparently the bribed Dr. Hunter had mentioned. When the judge entered, everyone stood up. An older woman with a shrewd eye and confident movements took her seat and opened the proceedings. Lamont began first, presenting the case with an unctuous note in his voice. Your Honor, we are gathered here today on a very delicate and sad matter. Mr. Hunter Oldham has gone to court with a heartache to protect his father, Mr. Irvin Oldham, from the effects of advanced dementia, which unfortunately has begun to seriously affect his ability to make decisions and care for himself. I sat stone-faced as Lamont described my supposed symptoms: forgetfulness, disorientation, mood swings, inability to manage finances. Every word was a knife to the heart. We have testimony from neighbors, medical professionals, and of course, Mr. Hunter Oldham himself, who observed disturbing changes in his father's behavior. Lamont continued. One by one, witnesses took the stand. A woman who identified herself as my neighbor, though I had never met her, recounted how she noticed me, wandering confused down the street in my nightgown. The clerk at the local store claimed that I regularly forgot to pay for my purchases. The doctor, the one with the folder, presented results of an examination he had never performed, showing signs of the early stages of dementia. Every false word, every fabricated report increased my rage. But I sat still, following Rachel's advice not to show emotion. Finally, it was Hunter's turn. He came to the podium with a look of deep sorrow on his face. "Your Honor," he began in a shaky voice, "it pains me unbearably to say this, but my father's condition is getting worse every day. I noticed the first signs a year ago, slight forgetfulness, repetitive questions. But since my mother's death, the situation has worsened dramatically." He wiped away a tear that didn't exist. "Dad was always a complicated man, demanding, sometimes even cold. But underneath that shell was a caring parent who only wanted the best for us. To see his mind fading, it breaks my heart. I could barely contain myself from jumping up and screaming about his hypocrisy." Rachel, as if sensing my condition, squeezed my wrist soothingly. "But the last straw was buying that huge house," Hunter continued. "My father, who'd been frugal all his life, was suddenly spending all his savings on a luxury mansion he couldn't afford. It was so unlike him that I realized it was no longer my father making the decisions, but his illness." Lamont provided the court with financial documents showing how much of my assets were the value of the house. Mr. Oldham had left himself minimal assets to live on, the attorney stressed. Without proper management of his finances, he would soon be in distress. Then it was Rachel's turn. She methodically refuted each accusation, presenting evidence of my competence, the results of an independent medical examination, testimony from bank employees about my ability to manage my finances, recordings of my conversations with Oliver that demonstrated my clarity of thought. "Your Honor," she concluded, "what we have before us is not a case of progressive dementia, but a cynical attempt by a son to take over his father's estate. Mr. Hunter Oldham has serious gambling-related financial problems. We have evidence of his debts to the casino amounting to over £400,000. There was a whisper in the hall. Hunter turned pale. "Furthermore," Rachel continued, "we have recordings of telephone conversations in which Mr. Hunter Oldham discusses with his lawyer a plan to manipulate the evidence and even mentions substituting his father's medication with neuroleptics to induce dementia-like symptoms." Lamont immediately jumped in, protesting the admissibility of such evidence. A heated legal altercation ensued between the attorneys, and the judge called a recess to review the submissions. In the hallway during the recess, Hunter approached me when Rachel stepped away for a moment. "Impressive performance, father," he hissed. "I didn't think you had it in you to be so sneaky." "I didn't think my son was capable of such treachery," I replied calmly. "I guess we were both wrong." His face contorted with rage. "You've always been like this, cold, calculating. All your life you've only thought about yourself, about your own damn savings. Even Mom was just part of your perfect plan. And now you're playing the victim?" "I always wanted the best for you, Hunter," I said, feeling the bitterness rise to my throat. "Everything I've done. The best for me?" He laughed bitterly. "You refused to pay for my college, forcing me to work in some shithole. You criticized every decision I made, every choice I made. And now you bought yourself a palace and want to enjoy life? After everything you've done?" I looked at my son and saw him as a stranger, distorted by hatred and resentment built up over years. "If you needed money, you could have just asked for it," I said quietly. "Honorous, and listen to another lecture about the value of labor and saving money?" "No thanks." He shook his head. "Besides, it doesn't matter anymore. The judge has enough doubt to award temporary custody, and once I get control of your finances, the rest is a matter of technique." After a recess, the judge announced her decision. "This is a complicated case," she began. "On the one hand, we have evidence of bizarre behavior and possible cognitive impairment. On the other, We have compelling evidence of competence and possible conflicts of interest on the part of the applicant. She paused, studying the papers. In such cases, the court must look first and foremost to the interests of the alleged incapacitated person. Having considered all of the evidence presented, I find no sufficient grounds to find Mr. Irwin Oldham totally incapacitated. I felt the tension release a little, but my joy was premature. However, the judge continued, given the seriousness of the charges and the potential risks involved, I find it necessary to order a temporary guardianship of Mr. Oldham's financial affairs, pending a full medical examination by a panel of independent experts. I'm out of breath. Despite our best efforts, Hunter would still get control of my money. Mr. Hunter Oldham is appointed as temporary guardian, with powers limited solely to financial matters. Mr. Oldham retains the right to handle his own living arrangements, medical care, and daily activities. I noticed Hunter and Lamont exchange satisfied glances. The medical examination must be completed within 30 days, the judge continued. Until then, no major financial transactions, including the sale of real estate, could be made without a further court order. That was the end of the hearing. Rachel patted me comfortingly on the arm. The main thing we'd accomplished was that the house was safe for now. And in a month, after an objective examination, we'll revoke custody completely. But I saw the glee on my son's face and realized that the battle had only just begun. The next few days became a nightmare. Hunter immediately took advantage of his new position. He froze my credit cards, restricted access to my bank accounts, and set a paltry out-of-pocket limit. He even tried to cancel my contract with Rachel, claiming I was unable to adequately choose legal representation, but the court denied the request. One morning I found a realtor outside my house installing a for sale sign. What does that mean? I asked indignantly. The court has banned the sale of real estate. Just pre-marketing, sir, the agent politely replied. Yakornam, we're not making a deal, just scoping out the market. Your son wants to be ready when the injunction is lifted. I called Rachel, who assured me that Hunter was not technically in violation of the court order, but promised to file a complaint about his actions. That night, Hunter showed up at my place unannounced with a bottle of whiskey and a fake smile. Thought I'd stop by and check on you, Father, he said, unceremoniously pouring himself a generous portion. Like a loving guardian? I sneered. You can be as angry as you want. He settled back in my favorite chair. But the fact remains that the court is on my side. Temporarily, I reminded him, pending a medical report. Hunter grinned. Oh, don't worry about that. I'm well connected in medical circles. Besides, he lowered his voice, you should have gotten over it a long time ago. This house is too much luxury for a lonely old man. I've already found you a great place at the Green Hills Retirement Center. Modest, but with all the comforts of home. You can't make me move, I objected. The judge made it clear that I retain the right to decide where to live. While you do, he smiled superiorly. But after a full evaluation that shows you're incapable of taking care of yourself, that'll change. In the meantime, enjoy these walls while you can. I already have a few interested buyers. I looked at my son, the man I'd raised, and didn't recognize him. Where is the little boy who once looked at me with adoration? When did he turn into this cold-blooded, calculating man, willing to send his own father to a cheap boarding house for money? Why would you do that, Hunter? I asked quietly. Was money really that important? Money? He laughed. It's not just about money, Father. It's about justice. All our lives you've controlled us, kept us on a short leash. Save money, Hunter. Work harder, Hunter. You can't catch a fish out of a pond without work, Hunter. And he saved and saved, denying my mother the trip she wanted, denying me the support I needed to start a business. And for what? So he could buy himself a fancy house in his old age and enjoy life alone? His words hit me like a slap in the face. Was that really how he had seen me all these years? Had I been so callous, so blind to the needs of my family? I've always wanted to provide you with a stable future, I said, and I thought Alice understood that. Mom was too kind to tell you the truth, Hunter said. But I know how she cried at night when you denied her the smallest thing, how she dreamed of seeing Paris, Rome, Venice, and she died without ever seeing anything but bleak Essex. Every word he said was like a knife to the heart. I really refused to let Alice travel, thinking it was a waste. I thought we had our whole lives ahead of us, that we'd make it when I'd packed enough. But Alice didn't live to see that moment. Out of... So don't pretend to be a victim, Father. Hunter finished his whiskey in one gulp. You always got what you wanted. Now it's my turn. With those words, he walked away, leaving me in stunned silence. I sat in the chair, numb with pain and the realization of my own guilt. What if Hunter was right? What if I really was a selfish tyrant, thinking only of the future, never of the present? But even so, did I deserve this? Did I deserve to lose everything I'd saved up all my life? To be left on the streets? To be declared insane by my own son? No. Whatever my mistakes, I'm not gonna let Hunter destroy me. I will not give up without a fight. I stood up and walked to the window. Behind the glass, I could see my garden, my trees, my house, everything I'd worked 3 decades for. Should I really just give it up? In that moment, something finally broke inside me. All my life, I had been a compliant father, forgiving my son's antics, covering his debts, always giving him a second chance. But not anymore. Hunter had declared war, and I would accept his challenge. I picked up my phone and dialed Oliver's number. I need your help, I said without preamble. I'm going to take back control of my life and teach my son a lesson he'll never forget. Oliver showed up at my door at 8 in the morning, holding the tattered leather briefcase that seemed to have been his faithful companion since his days of practicing law. Despite the early hour, he looked focused and full of energy, qualities I'd always appreciated in people. Coffee, I offered, ushering him into the living room. Later, Oliver answered, spreading out the papers on the table. Shakrasholma. First, we need to assess the situation and strategize. I was up half the night analyzing your case. I sank into the chair across from him, feeling the fatigue of the last few weeks weighing on my shoulders. How does it look? Honestly? Oliver looked up at me. Hunter is fast and efficient. He's done a superb job of preparing, finding corrupt witnesses, bribing the doctor, even got a realtor involved. I've noticed that, I nodded grimly. But, Oliver raised a finger, there are vulnerabilities in his plan. First, the judge didn't give him full custody, only financial custody, and that was temporary. Second, she forbade the sale of real estate until he was medically cleared. And third, and most importantly, he leaned forward. Hunter is too confident of his victory. He doesn't expect serious resistance and therefore becomes careless. That's his weakness. I felt a glimmer of hope. What do you suggest? Oliver laid out the documents in front of us. Copies of court orders, my bank statements, medical reports. We need to take action on several fronts at once. The first is to undermine the credibility of Hunter's experts. The witnesses he brought to court are likely to have questionable reputations or financial ties to him. We need to prove it. I nodded, mentally noting that I'd never seen the neighbor who'd allegedly spotted me wandering around in my nightgown. Second, Oliver continued, you need an independent medical examination, not just a private doctor whom Hunter might accuse of bias, but a reputable facility with an impeccable reputation. You got something in mind? Cambridge University Medical Center. They have a special cognitive assessment program. Their reputation is impeccable, and Lamont won't be able to challenge their findings. I frowned. But isn't a checkup with your neurologist enough? No, Oliver shook his head. We need a comprehensive report from an institution that the court trusts implicitly. Besides, he hesitated. What? I pushed. There's one thing. The assessment program includes a 2-day stay in the gerontology ward. It's basically a nursing home, but with a medical twist. I felt my insides clench. A nursing home. The very thought of it disgusted me. All my life, I had fought for independence, for the right to decide my own fate. And now I have to voluntarily go to an institution that symbolizes the loss of that independence? I know what you're thinking, Oliver said softly, but it's temporary, just a couple of days. And it is necessary, Erwin. We can't make a convincing case for your competence without their findings. I took a deep breath, fighting my pride. All right, I said at last. If it's necessary, I'll do it. Oh, great. Oliver jotted something down in his notebook. I'll make an appointment for you. And the third referral? I asked, guessing that this was only part of the plan. Oliver smiled, and there was a twinkle in his eye that reminded me that I was sitting in front of an experienced lawyer who had spent decades in tough legal battles. The third area is attack. We need to find out where Hunter got into such debt. £400,000 doesn't come out of nowhere. If we can prove he has a gambling problem or financial fraud, the court will never trust him with custody of your assets. But how do we find out? I asked. I don't have access to his finances. I know a private investigator, Oliver winked, a former client who owes me a favor. He can dig up your son's dirty laundry. We talked for a few more hours detailing the plan. Oliver contacted his contacts, arranged for me to be examined at the medical center, and hired a detective to gather information on Hunter. By evening, we had a clear strategy for action. Remember, Oliver said in parting, the key to victory is to keep your cool. Hunter expects you to break down, panic, or show signs of instability. Don't give him that pleasure. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of the situation. 2 days later, I arrived at the gerontology ward at Cambridge Medical Center. The building was modern, bright, with spacious corridors and large windows, but I wasn't fooled by its cozy appearance. It was still a nursing home, albeit a temporary one. A nurse, a young woman with a kind face, greeted me and ushered me into a small but tidy room. "Make yourself comfortable, Mr. Oldham," she said. "Dr. Richards will see you in an hour. In the meantime, you can rest or meet the other patients in the common parlor." I chose the second option, figuring that sitting alone would only increase my anxiety. The living room turned out to be a spacious room with comfortable chairs, tables for games, and a television. A few older people were playing cards, others were reading or just dozing in their chairs. I stopped awkwardly on the threshold, not knowing where to put myself, when I heard a sharp, commanding voice. "Don't stand there, young man. You're blocking the light." I turned around and saw an elderly woman, thin, with sharp features and piercing gray eyes. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, holding a book. "Excuse me." I stepped aside. "I'm new, just arrived." "It's noticeable," she replied dryly, giving me a critical look. "You're dressed too well for this place, and too focused." I couldn't help but smile at her bluntness. "Erwin Oldham," I introduced myself, stepping closer. "Mabel Cavanaugh." She nodded without extending her hand. "I'm the administrator here. Or I was until I broke my hip. Now I'm stuck among my own charges." "Ironic, isn't it?" "Quite," I agreed, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "I'm here for a checkup, just for a couple days." Mabel squinted at me, studying me so intently that it made me uncomfortable. "A checkup? You don't look like someone with cognitive impairment. Believe me, I've seen all sorts of cases in my 30 years on the job." I hesitated, not knowing if I should confront the stranger, but there was something about her direct gaze that inspired confidence. "My son is trying to prove I have dementia so he can get control of my finances," I admitted. "I need to get an independent evaluation to disprove his claims." Mabel snorted. "Ungrateful children are the curse of old age. I myself have a daughter who only visits me when she needs money." We got to talking. Mabel was an incredibly insightful and sharp-tongued woman. She ran a gerontology ward for almost 20 years before an accident forced her to become a patient herself. "So what did your son do to deserve such dislike?" she asked bluntly. I told her the whole story, about Hunter, about the trial, about temporary custody. Mabel listened intently, sometimes frowning or shaking her head. "It's a familiar story," she said when I was done. "Unfortunately, I've seen it more than once. Children who can't wait for their inheritance and try to take it away by force while their parents are still alive. The strange thing is," I said thoughtfully, "I always thought I knew my son well, but now I realize that I didn't know him at all." "Or he's changed," said Mabel. "Money and power often bring out the worst in people." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse who said that Dr. Richards was ready to see me. I said goodbye to Mabel, promising to continue the conversation later. The next 2 days were filled with various tests and examinations. I was tested for memory, logical thinking, decision-making ability, and spatial orientation. I performed tasks, answered questions, and solved puzzles. To my relief, the results were excellent. "Your mind is sharper than many 40-year-olds, Mr. Oldham," Dr. Richards said as he reviewed the results. "No evidence of cognitive impairment. Can you provide a formal report for the court? Shishunanimarun, I asked. Absolutely. We'll prepare a full report to be sent directly to the judge in charge of your case. In my spare time I spent with Mabel, she proved to be not only an interesting conversationalist, but also a valuable ally. Once she learned the details of my story, she volunteered to help. I know how the system works, she said, and I know how to get around it when I need to. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Mabel leaned conspiratorially toward me. I have an idea, she said quietly. You said your son has debts at the casino. Which one, I wondered. I'm not sure. In his conversation with his lawyer, he hadn't specified. Maybe the Royal Flash is the most prestigious casino in town. Just for people like Hunter. Mabel nodded. My nephew works in security at the Royal Flash. He could, unofficially check to see if your son is really owed there. And maybe get some details. I was stunned. Would you do that for me? Why not? She shrugged. I like justice, and I don't like it when children try to profit off their parents. So Mabel became my unexpected ally. Her nephew Adrian actually worked in casino security and agreed to help. Within a day, we already had the information. Hunter was a regular at the Royal Flash and had a debt of £320,000 there. But more importantly, Adrian had managed to get a videotape of Hunter drunkenly bragging to another player that he was about to receive a large sum of money from an old man's father, whom he would put in the loony bin. It's gold, said Mabel, as we discussed the find. Somewhere Washorn. With evidence like that, any court will side with you. I was grateful for the help, but I was still worried about finances. Hunter had already started managing my accounts, and while he couldn't sell the house, he could deplete my liquid assets. He withdrew almost $50,000 from my investment account, I told Mabel, allegedly to pay for my treatment. That's illegal, she frowned. He can only use the funds for your needs, not his own. It's hard to prove, I sighed. He could claim he was paying for professional counseling or something. Mabel thought for a moment. Maybe we need to find out exactly where that money went. If we can prove that he used it to pay off his debts, that would be a clear abuse. And then an idea occurred to me. Mabel, how well does your nephew know the casino staff? Quite well, she said with interest. Why? I need to know if Hunter has made any large deposits in the last few days, and if so, whether it was by cash or wire transfer. Mabel understood my intent and smiled. I'll ask Adrian to find out. A few hours later, we received a reply. Hunter had indeed paid the £30,000 to settle the debt 2 days ago. The payment was made by bank transfer. If we can prove that the money came from your accounts, we'll have direct proof of embezzlement, Mabel said. I contacted Oliver, who immediately enlisted his detective friend to investigate the financial flows. By the end of my stay at the medical center, we had amassed an impressive amount of evidence against Hunter. A medical report confirming my full capacity, a videotape of Hunter confessing his true motives, documents proving that he had used my money to partially pay off his debt at the casino. In addition, Detective Oliveira discovered that the neighbor who testified against me in court was actually Hunter's girlfriend, and the doctor who confirmed my dementia had a history of disciplinary action for falsifying medical records. On discharge day, Mabel was waiting for me in the lobby, sitting in her wheelchair. Well, Mr. Oldham, she said when I came to say goodbye, you seem to have everything you need to fight back against your ungrateful son. Thanks to you, I smiled sincerely. I don't know how to thank you for your help. Just win this case, she said firmly, and let me know when it's over. I want to hear how that scoundrel got what he deserved. I promised and, on impulse, leaned over and kissed her cheek. To my surprise, the stern Mabel blushed slightly. Don't think you can charm me, she grumbled, but there was a cheerful sparkle in her eyes. I'm too old for such foolishness. It's never too late for foolishness, I said with a wink. I'll stop by when it's over. Maybe we can take you out as soon as you're back on your feet. Femme. We'll see, Mabel said evasively, but I saw the corners of her lips turn up in a slight smile. Oliver was waiting for me out front to take me home. When he saw me with Mabel, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. I see you found a friend here? He asked as we got into the car. More than a friend, an ally, I answered, and told him everything Mabel and I had found out about Hunter. Oliver whistled. I can't believe it. We've gathered more evidence than I expected. With this material, not only will we be able to revoke temporary custody, but we'll be able to file countercharges against Hunter for fraud and embezzlement. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. It was good to know we had a remedy, but bittersweet to realize the depths to which my own son had fallen. What's next? Ah, I asked, looking out the window at the passing streets of Cambridge. We file a motion for emergency custody review, submit all of our evidence, and wait, Oliver answered. The judge will schedule a hearing within a few days. With the evidence we have, she should revoke the custody immediately. I could feel the hope and determination supplanting the despair of the last few weeks. I had a plan, I had evidence, I had allies. Now I had to use it all to not only protect myself, but to teach Hunter the lesson he deserved. I'm ready, I told Oliver. It was time to show my son that the old engineer was still capable of a few surprises. We pulled up in front of my house. To my surprise, a familiar car was parked out front. That's Jenny's car, I mumbled, not believing my eyes. My daughter's. Were you expecting her? Oliver asked. No, I shook my head. We hadn't talked in a long time. What could have brought Jenny here now? Had Hunter gotten in touch with her? Get her on his side? I got out of the car with a heavy heart, not knowing what was waiting for me outside the door of my own house. I stood in front of my own door, hesitant to enter. Behind it waited Jenny, my daughter, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. Since Alice's death, we'd grown apart. She'd always been closer to her mother, inheriting her softness and emotionality that I'd never fully understood. Do you want me to come with you? Oliver asked, seeing my confusion. I shook my head. No, this should be a conversation just between us. Gathering my courage, I opened the door and walked into the house. Jenny was sitting in the living room, tapping her fingers nervously on the arm of her chair. When I appeared, she jumped to her feet. A woman of 44 stood before me, but in her eyes I could still see the pigtailed girl who had once run around our garden in Essex. Hello, Jenny, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello, Father. Her voice was strained. I was hoping to catch you at home. I was at the hospital for a checkup. She frowned. Hunter said you were sick. Is that true? I grinned bitterly. Hunter says a lot of things. Most of it is lies. Jenny looked confused. She sat back in her chair, and I sat down across from her. You have a lot of explaining to do, she said. Hunter called 2 days ago, said you had advanced dementia, that you couldn't take care of yourself, and that he'd gotten custody of your finances. That's partially true, I nodded. He did get temporary custody, but everything else was a lie. I told her the whole story, the move to Cambridge, Hunter's sudden interest in my welfare, the overheard conversation, the trial, and the fabricated evidence. Jenny listened, and her eyes widened with shock. I can't believe it, she whispered when I finished. Hunter has always been selfish, but to do something like this is a crime. For him, it's about a lot of money, I said. And perhaps revenge for my coldness and stinginess, as he put it. Jenny shook her head. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify his actions. We sat in silence while I watched her digest the information. She'd changed over the years. She was more confident, a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Still, I could see Alice's features in her, the same wrinkle between her eyebrows when she thought about it, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Why didn't you contact me sooner? She asked at last. When all this started? I lowered my eyes. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me. We haven't talked for so long. Because you shut yourself off from me after Mom died. There was an old resentment in her voice. You literally buried yourself in your work and didn't even try to keep in touch. I know, I said quietly. And I'm sorry. I've never been good at express my feelings. Your mother was the link between us. Without her, I just didn't know how to communicate with you. Jenny sighed, and the anger in her eyes faded a little. I could have done more to save the relationship too, she admitted. But that's not what this is about right now. What are you going to do about the situation? I told her about the evidence I'd gathered, about Mabel and her nephew, about the upcoming hearing to revoke custody. Can you win? She asked with concern. With the evidence we have, the odds are high, I nodded. But Hunter won't give up easily. He's already started spending my money, and I'm sure he's preparing new proof that I'm incapacitated. Jenny suddenly straightened up. Ha ha, I want to help, she said firmly. Tell me what I can do. Her willingness to help was unexpected, but it warmed my soul. I reached out and gently touched her palm. Are you sure? It might be unpleasant, confronting Hunter in court. He betrayed you, she said firmly, and tried to drag me into his lies. I won't let him do that. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It was Oliver, concerned about the long silence in the house. Is everything all right? He asked, peering into the living room. More than okay, I smiled. Jenny, this is Oliver, my neighbor and friend. He's a former lawyer and the chief strategist of our operation. They exchanged greetings, and I briefly introduced Oliver. Another ally is great, he nodded, especially if it's a family member. Jenny's testimony about your normal behavior and cognitive abilities could be very valuable in court. We began discussing a plan of action. Jenny, being a landscape designer, offered to stay for a few days to officially work on a garden project for me. This would give her the opportunity to observe my daily behavior and gather evidence of my capacity. Besides, she added with a chuckle, I could really get to work on your garden. It's in a terrible state. Suddenly, my phone rang. Hunter's name popped up on the screen. I glanced at Jenny and Oliver, signaling them to be quiet, and put it on speaker. Hi, Hunter, I said, trying to make my voice sound tired and depressed. Dad, are you home? I called this morning, but you didn't answer. Yeah, I just got back from that clinic. They were doing some tests. Oh, so you've already been tested? He sounded pleased. And how were the results? I don't know, I paused deliberately, as if searching for words. They said they'd send everything to the judge. Yeah, I'm confused. So many questions, so many tests. Don't worry about it, Father. His tone became patronizing. I'll take care of the paperwork. I've got good news for you. I've found a great nursing home. It's very cozy with a garden and all the amenities. Jenny clenched her fists and Oliver frowned, but both remained silent. A nursing home? I asked with fake consternation. But I thought I could stay in my house. It's too big for one person, Father. Besides, you need constant care. Green Hills will take better care of you than I ever could. And what will happen to my house? I asked in a shaky voice. I've already found a buyer, Hunter said nonchalantly. A very favorable offer. As soon as we get court approval to sell, the deal will be closed. So soon? My voice trembled, and this time it was sincere. In spite of all our preparations, I was still hurt by his forwardness. There's no point in stalling, Hunter replied. The market is favorable right now, and I want to give you the best care possible, and that requires funds. Funds to pay off your debt, I thought. But I said aloud, I understand. You're right. I guess I really can't do it on my own. That's good, Hunter sounded pleased. I'll stop by tomorrow and help you pack. Don't take too much. There's not much room in the boarding house. Okay, son. I tried to make my voice sound broken and submissive. Whatever you say. After the call ended, Jenny looked stunned. He's actually going to sell your house and put you in a nursing home, and he doesn't even ask your opinion. Now you know what we're dealing with. Oliver nodded grimly. But he can't sell the house without the court's permission, right? Jenny asked. That's right, I confirmed. But he's already found a buyer, and he seems confident that he'll get that permission. Maybe he has some extra trump card up his sleeve. We spent the rest of the day strategizing. We decided that I would continue to play the role of the submissive old man to put Hunter's guard down. Jenny would openly help me prepare for the move while secretly gathering more evidence. Oliver, on the other hand, would handle the legal side of the case, preparing all the necessary documents for the hearing. In the evening, I called Mabel to break the news. Is your daughter on your side? That's good, she said. Family support is important in cases like this. How's your leg? I asked, changing the subject. Better, she said, a smile in her voice. The doctors say I should be able to start walking with a cane in a couple weeks. Then I should definitely invite you to dinner when this is all over. Don't rush into invitations, Mr. Oldham, she said sternly, but I could hear the warmth in her voice. Deal with your son first. I will, I promised. And Mabel, thank you for everything. The next morning, Hunter showed up as promised. He was dressed in an expensive suit and exuded the self-assurance of a man who thinks he's already won. Father, he nodded as he entered the house, but froze when he saw Jenny in the kitchen. Jenny, What are you doing here? Hi, brother, she answered coldly. I came to help my dad move. You didn't think I'd leave him alone at a time like this, did you? Hunter looked puzzled but quickly pulled himself together. Of course I'm glad you're here. I'm just surprised you and your father haven't spoken in so long. All the more reason to catch up, she smiled with barely perceptible menace. Especially when I found out about his, health problems. Hunter cast a quick glance at me. I sat in the chair with a blank stare, as if I didn't quite understand what was going on. It's a difficult situation, he sighed with fake sadness. But I've found the perfect solution. Green Hills is the best boarding house in the area. I'm sure you picked the best for your father, Jenny said sweetly. And of course, the best decision for everyone. Hunter tensed, catching the sarcasm in her words, but didn't pursue the subject. I brought boxes for packing, he said, pointing to the car. Let's start with the essentials. All day, Jenny and I had been playing the roles of the disoriented old man and the caring daughter helping her father. Hunter, on the other hand, was in his element, commanding and making decisions about what I really needed in the nursing home. He declared most of my personal belongings as junk, including my collection of old vinyl records and books that I had collected all my life. This won't fit in your new room, Dad, he said, carelessly pushing aside a stack of books. There's very limited space. I nodded absently, but inside I was seething with rage. Jenny, seeing my state of mind, occasionally squeezed my hand for support. At one point, when Hunter came out to answer the phone, she whispered, "You're a great actor. I almost believed you were really losing your mind." Years of practicing keeping my emotions in check, I replied quietly. Your mother always said I could have had a career in poker. Hunter returned, looking pleased. Great news, Father. I just talked to the director of Green Hills. They're ready to take you in as early as this Friday. That soon? I deliberately made my voice weak and frightened. The sooner the better. He patted my shoulder. You need professional care. I can already see you getting confused and forgetting things. But the court hasn't given final authorization yet, Jenny intervened. Shouldn't we wait for the results of the medical examination? Hunter looked at her with slight irritation. It's a formality. I have temporary custody, and I have the right to make decisions about his medical care. Besides, he lowered his voice as if I couldn't hear, the doctor who examined him has already reported the preliminary results. They're not encouraging. I almost jumped up to accuse him of lying, but held back, remembering our plan. Jenny remained calm too, though I could see her knuckles turning white. I see, she said. Well, then we really need to hurry up with the preparations. Hunter looked surprised at her pliability, but quickly went back to his orders. Soon he drove off, promising to return tomorrow with more boxes. As soon as his car rounded the corner, Jenny turned to me. He's lying about the test results. I'm sure the medical center hasn't handed over any conclusions yet. I nodded. Most likely, but that's a good thing. The more he lies, the more mistakes he'll make. We contacted Oliver, who confirmed that the results of the medical examination would not be sent to the judge until 2 days later. Plus, he's already filed an emergency custody review, and the hearing is scheduled for Thursday, the day before the proposed move to Green Hills. Perfect timing, Oliver said. Hunter doesn't expect a catch. He's too confident he'll win. When we present all the evidence, he won't have time to prepare a response. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins. For the first time in many years, I felt a real excitement. Not the quiet interest that I felt when solving engineering problems, but a lively, sharp excitement from the battle. Over the next few days, we busily prepared for the hearing. Jenny recorded videos of my daily actions, demonstrating complete mental clarity. Oliver was gathering legal documents and preparing witnesses. Mabel and her nephew provided definitive proof of Hunter's financial machinations. It turned out that he had already put down a deposit on a new sports car using my money. Hunter showed up every day, increasingly confident of his victory. He even began discussing how he would dispose of the surplus from the sale of the house after he secured my boarding house. Sonner, maybe I'll invest in real estate, he said, ignoring the glances Jenny and I exchanged behind his back. The market is booming, especially in London. Finally, Thursday came, the day of the hearing. I dressed particularly carefully, choosing my best suit. Jenny helped me with my tie, and Oliver was waiting for us in the car. Are you ready? Jenny asked as we walked out of the house. More than ready, I answered. It was time to teach Hunter a lesson he'd never forget. We got in the car and headed to the courthouse where the fate of my house, my money, and more importantly, my dignity would be decided. The courthouse looked exactly the same as the first time, but my feelings were completely different. I had walked in depressed and scared then. Now I walked in full of determination. Jenny Oliver and I arrived early and met Rachel Drake in the hallway. She was fully prepared for battle tight, organized, with an impressive stack of documents in her hands. "All set," she said, shaking my hand. "Judge Harmon has received all of our motions and medical reports. I've also filed a request for full restitution for the damage to your finances." "Is Hunter here yet?" I asked, looking around. "Yes, with Lamont." Rachel nodded toward the other end of the hallway, where my son was having a tense conversation with his lawyer. They look nervous. I think Lamont is starting to realize that their case is coming apart." I noticed Hunter cast a puzzled look in our direction. Apparently, he hadn't expected to see me in court today, probably thought I was still dutifully packing to move to Green Hills. And to see me standing up straight in an immaculate suit and clear-eyed was clearly a shock to him. A tall, middle-aged man in a suit approached us. "Mabel's nephew, Adrian." "Mr. Oldham," he extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Aunt Mabel speaks very highly of you." "Likewise," I shook his hand. "Your help is invaluable, Adrian." "You're welcome," he smiled. "My aunt would never forgive me if I didn't help. Besides, I can't stand people who try to take advantage of their parents." The courtroom doors opened and we walked inside. I noticed that the courtroom was more crowded today than last time. In the front row sat Mabel in her wheelchair. She had insisted on attending despite her bad leg. Several medical experts from the Cambridge Center were seated next to her, ready to testify. I even noticed a couple of neighbors, including Mrs. Pettigrew, an elderly lady who lived across the street, who herself offered to testify about my perfectly adequate behavior. Hunter and Lamont sat on the opposite side of the hall. I noticed that there were almost no witnesses on their side. Obviously, they hadn't expected serious resistance and hadn't prepared. "Arise, the court is now in session," announced the clerk, and Judge Harmon entered the room. She sat down, looked carefully around, and began. "We are here to review the temporary custody of Mr. Irwin Oldham, which was granted 2 weeks ago. According to the petition, there are new circumstances that require the court's immediate attention. Mrs. Drake, you may begin." Rachel rose and stated the case. "Your Honor, 2 weeks ago, this court appointed Mr. Hunter Oldham as temporary guardian of his father's finances, based on the assumption that Mr. Irvin Oldham might be incapacitated. Today we present evidence that this decision was based on false testimony and fabricated documents, and that Mr. Hunter Oldham used his position as guardian for personal enrichment rather than to protect his father's interests." Lamont immediately jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations." "We will present all the necessary evidence," Rachel replied calmly. The judge nodded. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Ms. Drake." Rachel began by presenting the results of the medical examination from the Cambridge Medical Center. Dr. Richards personally testified to my full capacity. "Mr. Oldham has undergone a series of sophisticated cognitive tests," he reported. "His results are not only within normal limits for his age group, but above average. No evidence of dementia or other cognitive impairment was found." Then other witnesses came forward. Neighbors attesting to my normal behavior, bank employees speaking of my ability to manage my finances, even a salesman from a local store refuting the perjurer's testimony about my forgetfulness. "And now," Rachel said, "we would like to call Mr. Irwin Oldham himself so that the court can personally assess his cognitive abilities." I rose and walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, Rachel started asking me questions about my career, about my decision to move to Cambridge, about my financial investments. I answered clearly and confidently, giving accurate facts and figures without hesitation. "And how do you explain the testimony of witnesses who said they saw you disoriented and forgetful?" she asked. I looked directly at Hunter. Those witnesses were either mistaken or perjured themselves, and some of the symptoms my son referred to were the result of his own manipulations. He'd rearranged things in my house to give the appearance of my forgetfulness. A whisper drifted through the hall. Lamont tried to protest again, but the judge gestured him to stop. Do you have proof of these allegations, Mr. Oldham? Yes, Your Honor, I nodded. I installed hidden cameras in my house after I suspected something was wrong. The footage showed my son deliberately moving objects and changing settings in the house. Rachel showed the court the videotapes. They clearly showed Hunter methodically rearranging my belongings, opening windows that I had closed, changing the temperature on the thermostat. Hunter's face had gone pale, and Lamont was frantically scribbling something in his notebook. What's more, Rachel continued, we have a recording of a telephone conversation in which Mr. Hunter Oldham confesses his true motives. She turned on the audio recording and Hunter's voice came through clearly into the room. Once we declare him incompetent, I'll have control of his assets and can pay him off. No, he suspects nothing, you old fool. Hunter's face contorted with rage. He leaned sharply toward Lamont, whispering fiercely to him. But Rachel saved the real blow for last. She called Adrian, who provided proof of Hunter's debts at the Royal Flash Casino, and a videotape of my son bragging about his plan to put the old man in a mental institution and take his money. And finally, Rachel said, we have evidence that Mr. Hunter Oldham used money from his father's accounts to partially pay off his own debts at the casino, as well as putting down a deposit on a new sports car worth over £100,000. She provided the court with bank statements confirming the transfers of large sums of money from my accounts to the casino and car dealership. When Rachel finished, there was silence in the courtroom. The judge scrutinized the documents, and Hunter sat with his head down. Then it was the turn of the defense. Lamont tried to save the day by arguing that Hunter's actions were motivated solely by concern for me, and that the financial transactions were merely a temporary use of funds he planned to return. Moreover, he added, even assuming that Mr. Irwin Oldham is competent now, there is no guarantee that his condition will not worsen in the near future. Given his age and previous suspicions, it would be prudent to retain at least partial control of his finances. Judge Harmon heard both sides and called a half-hour recess to review the entire case file. During the recess, I sat in the hallway with Jenny Oliver and Mabel, who had been brought in a wheelchair. You were great, Irwin, Mabel said, squeezing my hand. Clear, collected, convincing. Thank you, I smiled, but it's a credit to all of us. I couldn't have done it without your help. What are you going to do with Hunter if you win? Jenny asked quietly. Will you sue him for fraud? I wondered. It was a question that had plagued me for the past few days. Part of me wanted retribution, wanted to see Hunter get the punishment he deserved for his betrayal. But the other part, the part that still remembered the little boy I taught to ride his bike, couldn't bear the thought of my own son going to prison. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly, but I have a plan. When we got back to the courtroom, Judge Harmon was waiting for us. Her face was serious and determined. Having considered all the evidence presented, she began, I come to the following conclusion. The temporary guardianship ordered 2 weeks ago was based on false information and bad faith testimony. The medical examination proves conclusively that Mr. Irwin Oldham is fully capable and in no need of guardianship. I felt a tremendous weight lifted from my shoulders. Moreover, the judge continued, there is overwhelming evidence that Mr. Hunter Oldham has acted in bad faith, pursuing his own financial interests rather than the good of his father. Therefore, I hereby order the temporary guardianship is revoked immediately, and all rights and powers to manage his finances are returned to Mr. Irwin Oldham. Jenny squeezed my hand joyfully. Oliver nodded approvingly. I glanced at Hunter, his face white with rage, his fists clenched. In addition, the judge added, the court orders Mr. Hunter Oldham to return all funds he has used for personal use, including casino payments and the deposit on the car, within 30 days. Until that requirement is met, his property is subject to seizure. She looked at Hunter over her glasses. I must point out, Mr. Oldham, that your actions could be considered fraud and breach of trust. Your father has every right to file a police report against you. The fact that he hasn't so far shows his extraordinary mercy. I'm up from my seat. Your Honor, may I say something? The judge nodded. I'm grateful to the court for a fair decision, I began, then turned to Hunter. Son, you betrayed me in the most brutal way. You tried to take away not only my house and my money, but my dignity, my freedom, my sanity. You were willing to send me to a cheap boarding house, knowing I was fully capable, just to cover your debts. Hunter averted his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. I could sue you and you'd go to jail. But I won't do that. There was a whisper of surprise in the room. Not out of pity, I clarified, and not out of the love you've trampled on, but because revenge will not bring me satisfaction. Instead, I want to announce that I have already changed my will. I paused, seeing Hunter tense. You are disinherited, Hunter. Not a penny of my estate will you receive. Most of my assets will be donated after my death to an education fund for underprivileged children, those who truly appreciate the opportunities you've always taken for granted. Hunter's face contorted with shock and rage. I've given part of the house to Jenny, I continued, looking at my daughter, on the condition that we try to rebuild our relationship in the years I have left. Jenny smiled through her tears and nodded. Sutarason. And so that you won't be tempted to try to incapacitate me again in the future? I turned to Hunter again. I have appointed independent trustees who will ensure that my will is carried out even if I am incapacitated. I turned to the judge. That's all, Your Honor. I'm not asking for punishment for my son. Living with the consciousness of his own betrayal is punishment enough. The judge nodded. This court is adjourned. Hunter jumped up from his seat and rushed over to me. You can't do this, he shouted. That's my money. I'm your son. You stopped being my son the moment you decided to declare me crazy for profit, I said quietly. Go home, Hunter, and try to start living an honest life. He stood there shaking with rage, then turned and ran out of the room, leaving a confused Lamont to gather his papers. After the hearing, we gathered in a small group, me, Jenny, Oliver, Mabel, and Rachel, at a cafe near the courthouse. The mood was upbeat, though I felt bitter about finally breaking up with my son. Did you really give part of the house to me? Jenny asked as we sat at the table. Yes, I nodded. A third of the house is yours, not because I expect you to take care of me, but because I want you to know that you always have a home to come back to. She squeezed my hand. Thank you, Father, and I do want to repair our relationship. Life is too short for resentment. Mabel, sitting next to me, nodded approvingly. Very wise, my dear. Family's the most precious thing we have. Real family, not those who simply carry our last name. I looked at the people around the table, the daughter with whom we were beginning to rebuild a relationship, the new friend Oliver, who was more reliable than many old acquaintances, Mabel, whose keen insight and kindness touched my heart, Rachel, whose professionalism helped to bring justice. You know, I said, picking up my cup of coffee, when I bought the house in Cambridge, I thought I had finally found what I had dreamed of all my life. But now I realize that the real value is not in the walls and furniture, but in the people who share your life with you, a sincere relationship that isn't measured in money. To new beginnings, Jenny offered, raising her cup. And to justice, Oliver added. To second chances, Mabel said quietly, meeting my gaze. We clinked our cups together, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. I'd lost a son, but I'd gained something more, a chance to start over, to build a relationship based not on obligations and expectations, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. So, I said, turning to Mabel, how about that dinner when your leg is healed? She smiled, and there was a mischievous twinkle in her eye. I will consider your offer, Mr. Oldham, but be warned, I'm a woman of high standards. I'm sure you are, I laughed, and I promise to live up to it. Jenny looked from me to Mabel and back again, then smiled broadly. You know, Dad, I think you have a lot of interesting things ahead of you. Yes, I agreed, feeling the colors I'd missed since Alice's death come back to life. I guess you're right. I've been living in the past and the future for a long time, but now I realize the value of the present moment, and I'm going to savor every day. When we left the cafe, the fall sun was shining brightly on the streets of Cambridge, turning an ordinary day into a holiday. I looked at my house in the distance, big, beautiful, but no longer my ultimate goal in life. Now it was just home, a place where I could spend my remaining years, surrounded by people who truly cared about me and I about them. A place where new stories, new relationships,